Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Odyssey, the podcast where we explore the highs and the lows of entrepreneurship, featuring the bold and the brave who dare to dream. Every episode, we dive deep into the strategies that work, the challenges that teach, and the moments that change everything. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, these are the insights and experiences you need to fuel your own Odyssey.
Welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur's Odyssey. I'm Brandon Moore. I'm really so glad that you decided to listen or watch this podcast, and I really hope that these last few have been helping you. Over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about some of the topic is, over the last couple of episodes, we've been working through parts of my new upcoming book, How to Get Along with Anyone, Anywhere. And the first week we talked about avoiding criticism, that criticism kills relationships. And then last week we talked about praise freely, just to encourage others, that when you encourage others, you pour courage into people, and how much that can affect them, and how much that can enhance and create connections with other people. And so today we're going to talk about setting healthy boundaries. And there's been a lot of talk about boundaries and securing our border as the U.S. And why do we want to secure our border? Because not everybody that's coming in through the southern border is good for us, has our best interest at heart, right? And so setting boundaries as individuals, it works very similarly. If we're setting boundaries, it's because we want to protect our person, our agency, our identity. And that not everybody that we let into our circle has our best interest at heart. And so Dr. Henry Cloud has a book that he wrote about boundaries, and I highly recommend that you read that. He says in that book, a boundary shows me where I end and where someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. What do boundaries do for you? Boundaries protect your identity. They protect you. They protect who you are as a person. When somebody crosses a boundary, what they say is that you don't exist. You don't matter. You don't have value. And so when you have a healthy boundary set, what you're saying is, no, I do matter. I do have value. I exist, and I have the right to exist in this space. They reinforce your value. They reinforce that you matter, that you have value, and that you're important. God says that you are important. And we talk about what voices are we listening to. We want to make sure that you are listening to the Holy Spirit. God is saying to you that you are His child. You belong to Him. You matter. You have value. And you shouldn't listen to any other voice that tells you any differently. What do boundaries also do? They also allow you the freedom to be yourself, your true self. And when you think about boundaries and setting boundaries, people don't always associate freedom and boundaries in the same sentence. But the truth is that when you have a boundary, inside the boundary, you're free. It's like when you're on the playground. If there's a fence around the playground, inside that fence, you can do whatever you want. You can play whatever game, whatever toys that you have. And on the other side of that fence, there might be a highway. There might be some danger that might come across. And so, but within that boundary, you're free. You're able to be you inside that boundary. And so we're going to talk about those boundaries and how do we create boundaries for our lives. A few weeks ago, and I haven't talked to him about sharing this story, so I probably need to, but one of my sons borrowed my truck, and he didn't ask me first. And so we have a lot of trucks, and I have a truck that I use as my daily driver. It's a nicer truck than our work trucks, of course. And so when he borrowed my truck, it made me really angry, and it frustrated me. And for a couple of days, I didn't know why it bothered me and why I was so angry. But then I realized that, well, it's because he crossed a boundary. When you take something of somebody else's without their permission, what you're saying is that they don't exist, that they're not important, that they don't matter. And so once I realized what was frustrating me and what was upsetting me about him borrowing my truck without asking, I was able to forgive him and say, oh, that's within me to do. So I'm going to release him from that obligation by forgiving him, and then I can protect that relationship. When you forgive somebody, and we'll talk about forgiveness later, it's more about what's going on in your heart. And the truth is about that boundary is that I didn't tell him, hey, if you're going to borrow my truck, you need to ask my permission. I didn't set clear expectations. There was nothing, as far as he's concerned, what's his is his and what's mine is his. That's the way it's always been for all our kids. Is when they grew up, everything in our house, they believed it was theirs until they move out, and then they're supposed to realize it's not theirs, it's mine, and what's theirs is theirs. And so, and that's a boundary that has to be established as your kids get older. And if you're a kid and you're getting older, you have to understand that there are new boundaries that happen as you age and as you grow in life. And the thing about when we create boundaries, we have to make sure, one, that there are clear lines. We have to have clear set expectations. The thing about my son borrowing my truck, I didn't set any clear expectations. How can I be upset with somebody if they don't know what my boundary is? If I don't show them or I don't tell them. Now, that doesn't mean that you go around, if you have a newsletter or maybe you post a list on the door or like Martin Luther. No, you don't want to post a list on Facebook or Instagram or maybe send out a newsletter with your list of boundaries. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is in the process of the relationship, you let people know what your boundaries are. Like if you have a boundary that says that I don't ride with other women, alone with other women. And so if somebody asks you for a ride, then you can share with them your boundary. And then they can move on with their life. If they don't like that boundary, maybe they're not really your friend. Maybe they had an ulterior motive. It doesn't matter. What you're saying is that I exist, I matter, I have value, and these are my boundaries that I'm setting. It's with clear definitions and just bringing clarity, clear lines. The second thing that boundaries have, they have a confrontation when they're crossed. If somebody crosses that boundary, you need to speak up. You need to, unlike me, not talking to my son about it yet. For me, that was kind of a petty thing, and I had to get over myself in that. But when somebody crosses a boundary, there needs to be some kind of confrontation. And sometimes the confrontation is with yourself. Why is that boundary there? Why does that boundary exist? Why is it upsetting me right now? Or you have a confrontation with the individual who crossed the boundary. You have to let that instance of that crossing be known. Otherwise, what happens? If somebody crosses that boundary and they cross it over and over and over again, then what happens is you build up a callus in that area, and then you start to get bitter and resentful in that area. And that becomes a root of bitterness in your heart. And then you've got to do more about that. You've got to do a little bit more digging and probably some freedom ministry in that area. You don't want to ignore that boundary. You want to defend your identity. It's just like if somebody invades or somebody harms the United States, our job and our president's job and responsibility is to defend our nation, to defend our identity as a country. And you as an individual, if somebody crosses a barrier, don't ignore it. Do either internally, you need to, with it in yourself or forgive the other person, or you need to have that confrontational meeting, which, contention. Be just a person that says, hey, I know that this might be a contention between us, but I think if we go over it and if we talk about it, it'll bring the bond and our connection together, especially if that other person really has an interest in protecting that relationship. If they want to protect your heart just as much as you want to protect your heart, then that meeting will go a lot smoothly than you think. The last thing, so first we had setting clear lines, and then the second thing we had have the confrontation. The third thing is consequences. Now, what are consequences? If you do this, I'm going to do this. No, it's more of, and remember, we don't control other people. The idea that you can control other people and manipulate them is an illusion. And might work to do it and try to do it over and over again, but it's only going to create problems for you and problems for that relationship. That makes you an opposition to other relationships and not help. And so we don't want to try to control other people, but what we can control is what we do. So for instance, that issue with the truck. So if, tell my son, hey, from now on, I would like you to ask before you take my truck out somewhere. More than likely, I'm going to say yes, but I would like you to ask first. Okay, so then if he crosses that boundary again, then what am I going to do? Give him an ultimatum? Cut the relationship off? No, what I might do is say, okay, but it seems like you have trouble asking permission or observing my boundary, and the consequence is one that I'm going to take the keys and I'm going to put them in a place where you can't get them until you ask for them. Right now, most of our keys set right by our garage door, so that as we're leaving, we pick up our keys, and as we come in, we put them down, put them on the hook. And so if the boundary is being crossed, that I need to maybe take the keys and put it in my room and just leave them on my pocket. Something I can do to protect my boundary. Now, that's a silly example, but there are lots of examples of, okay, if somebody keeps doing this, then what are you going to do to make sure that boundary, well, I may have to step away from you. Mother for years had taken advantage of us and really had felt like that we owed her this, and so we had to do as a family is step back and say, okay, sorry, but from now on, there's not going to be contact between us and you. And it was a hard boundary to set, but it had to be set to protect my family, to protect my heart, and to protect the relationships within my family. So there has to be consequences. And it's not that you're trying to try to control other people, but you can control how you respond, how you react, and your actions individually. Oftentimes when we see being crossed, but there are times when we cross boundaries. And I see that a lot when we take on other people's problems. One of the examples in Dr. Cloud's book, he talks about a couple whose son had been doing drugs and was kicked out of several schools, and they were paying for his apartment, paying for his car, paying for his food, and felt like he didn't have any problems, and Dr. Cloud agreed. And they were shocked. What do you mean he doesn't have any problems? He's got this drug problem. He keeps getting kicked out of school. And he said, yeah, but every time that happens, you keep rescuing him. So he really doesn't have any problem. And so he asked them, would you like me to help your son have some problems? And so that's another boundary that we cross into other people's lives, is that we try to make their problems. There are some people that try to make their problems our problems, try to push them onto us, and we have to set boundaries against them. But then we have to realize that times when we get into other people's business and we need to just stay out. Father and having adult kids and seeing them grow up, there's a transition that happens every time kids grow up, that you have to pull back. You're not their provider anymore. They start providing for themselves, and can't step in and rescue all the time. And so it is a challenge. And problem solver, I like to fix things, and sometimes I just have to hold my opinions and hold everything in, because if I start expressing these opinions, like I said in the first episode, that can sound like criticism, that they're not doing a good job, and I don't want that. That's crossing a boundary, their problems, and that's not something I want to do, is to usurp their authority, usurp their identity and their agency, and it matter to me, and I value them so much, and I just want that relationship healthy and strong and full of love. And so I want to protect my heart, protect their heart, by making sure my boundaries are in place. So, what benefits come with healthy boundaries? Well, we can, with boundaries, proper boundaries being set, we limit the influence other people have on us. It says in Proverbs 27 that the fear of man brings a snare. Trust in the Lord. So when we, how much influence, we don't let other people's influence change our boundaries and encroach into our agency and our identity, that really can help us limit their influence. Second, begin to start acting within our own responsibility. We don't cross the line into somebody else's responsibility. We ask God to take care of things, and we lay it at His feet, And then we just wait for him to do something, and eventually we end up taking it back. If you're not going to do anything, I'm just going to take it back. Well, got to rest in knowing that He's going to take care of us. And so with other people, we have to trust the Holy Spirit on the inside of them. Set us in the garden, lots of different trees, lots of different choices to make. And honestly, He's not a bad parent, but He did put us in a place where we could make a bad choice. The opportunity was there for us. And so when we see other people's lives, and our friends, our parents, and they might make a bad choice, and that's theirs to make. Don't jump in and try to take authority or try to take responsibility that doesn't belong to you. And when you do that, then you avoid the stress that comes along with other people's responsibility. There's a book called The Myth of Stress, and it really is a good book talking about how to deal with stress and how to manage stress, because stress happens all the time. There are a lot of stressors that happen to us internally, externally, all the time. And there's good stress, bad stress. And the truth is that some of that we take on ourselves. And so, healthy boundaries will be able to avoid the stress of other people's responsibility. And that also helps us to manage our time. Boundaries are on how much time we're going to give to certain things. When I talk about time management, I ask people to take an audit of the last weeks. For the next 3 weeks, do a time audit. Write down everything that they do. And then I ask them, what are your priorities? What's the most important thing to you? And they'll say, family, art, or reading, or work, or whatever. And then I'll ask them, okay, so look at your last 3 weeks. The priorities that you told me, are those the same as what you did? And a lot of times you look at your last 3 weeks, and even though you say certain things are your priority, it's not evident in your schedule and how you plan and manage your time. And so setting healthy boundaries on your time and what you're not going to be involved with. I was asked to teach a class one time, and it's going to be Monday for that month. And I really labored over the decision because other things I was doing that month, and that would have been 3 nights a week that I was away from home. And if I say that the family is a priority to me, that means that I need to be home for my family. And so, I wrestled with that decision. I finally said no, and the guy said, okay. So sometimes we think it's a bigger deal than it is to set healthy boundaries. But when we set healthy boundaries, God is faithful. He's going to make sure we get everything done that we need to be done. We want to protect our priorities. All right, so just going over again, we need to set healthy boundaries. It's going to help you get along with people when you have clear lines. There's a point of confrontation. You don't ignore when somebody's crossed a boundary, or you don't ignore when you've crossed a boundary. You've crossed a boundary, you may have to ask forgiveness. Don't let the sun go down. That anger, or don't let the sun go down on the need to ask forgiveness. And then consequences. It needs to be consequences for someone who's crossed the boundary. Now, I understand if somebody crosses the boundary once, you're not going to immediately cut them off. But if it's a repeated offender, you're going to have that confrontation. You're going to have to say, hey, because you wanted to do this and this is what you want to do, I'm going to have to do this. It's not what I want to do, but in order to protect our relationship, I'm going to have to step down. I'm going to have to step away because I want our relationship to stay good. Because if this boundary keeps continuing to be broken, then that will cause a break in our relationship. And so you can see how having healthy boundaries helps to improve relationships. And it helps you to choose the relationships that you want to have. All right. I appreciate you being at this episode. I really appreciate it, guys. If you to the podcast, share it with somebody who needs to hear this. Appreciate you. Thanks for joining the Entrepreneur's Odyssey, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Odyssey. We hope today's journey has left you inspired and ready to push the boundaries of what you thought was possible. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review us, and share this episode with someone who could use a little inspiration on their entrepreneurial journey. Join us for more insights and stories. Until then, keep chasing your dreams and write your own Odyssey.